I'm Jason. I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you so much for everybody. We've got a lot of people online already, and I guess I'm very excited. A little nervous about showing this because Dan, you and I have been working on this for 2 years, and I had it in my mind a year before that to try and figure out how I was going to approach you on it. But yeah, I know we'll be getting into it, but this is really
Well,
exciting.
actually, that's a good place to start, Jason, and everybody else as well. Uh, uh, Folks, we are going to introduce our some video about a project that we've been cooking up for several years. And I should say at the outset that Jason and I met at the Niles S&A Silent Film Museum about 4 years ago. And so, and we are coming to you, today's event is a Niles S&A Silent Film Museum event, and we would both dearly love it if we were, and we did intend to be in Niles, California, but of course nobody's anywhere except at home right now, except people demonstrating for their right to be stupid. And so, but I think people might be interested in knowing how this project came about before we even start describing the project. And it was all Jason's idea. I take no responsibility for anything that has happened before or will happen in the future. Why don't you tell them how it started?
Well, yeah, that's great. Great little passing of the torch here. Let me see. There we go. Yeah, it turned out it was during Niles, the Charlie Chaplin days. I'm not sure anybody can see me. I think it's just, let's see here. How about that? Is that working? No?
Not yet.
No, okay. I don't know, maybe I have to be louder? Do I have to be louder to be heard?
Are you getting messages that you can't be heard?
We can see you. Oh, okay. Oh, you can see me. Oh, I can see me now. Never mind. So I guess what I wanted to do is talk about how I do my hair. No.
That was
So
recite
thanks,
poetry
Dan.
if you go up on your lines, Jason. 'Twas many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that I loved with a love that was more than a love. I loved the sweet Annabel Lee. I thought that was Barbara Allen when I started it, but sorry, Barbara, that's not your poem. We'll have to find your poem by the end of this.
Yes, yeah. That's a whole other webinar. Yeah, it all started with watching you, Dan, at Chaplain Days, and we're talking 3 years ago now, and it was my first time meeting you, and you were showing your Red Letter Days, and I was very impressed with the book. Bought the book, got you to sign it, and read the thing cover to cover, and I was so immersed in the reality of these letters that I couldn't help but visualize them as a television series. And that was my initial thought. I thought, well, why can't we just have that? Netflix is the thing now. We should see Charlie Chaplin if we can. Actually, I'd like to see Chaplin, the film, done in its entirety, so that it's actually done properly as far as it's laid out in his life. But isn't this a great way to start? This is almost unseen information from Red Letter Days, the book you have put notes to. So that was my first thought. And I took a whole year to kind of stew over that thought and wondered about the next time I'd see you, which would be the next Charlie Chaplin Days in Niles. And maybe I'd talk to you about it. And that happened. But just before that, you gave me a copy of another book, which totally changed the whole concept almost instantly over the breakfast you and I were having at the Skillet across the street on Niles Boulevard. Can you mention that book to everybody? Give them a good detail of that, because what I'm saying is we have two books now that are heavily influencing this new project. So I want you to introduce that second book, if you could.
Let me do this by saying at that fateful meeting, soon to be hopefully a fateful meeting, you and I talked about this probably at the Skillet over lunch. Not the Skillet, it was one of the other restaurants in Niles. one of the other lovely restaurants. It was the one, yeah, it was a Skillet, because we were outside, I think, on their patio. And you said, Dan, I know how people are taking in entertainment. This is prescient, Jason, because it is how people are really taking it in now that we're in the lockdown. You said they're not going to the movie theater so much, they're binge watching Netflix. And this book that you have been involved with, Charlie Chaplin's Red Letter Days, would make a perfect Netflix miniseries or series. Now, I want to take a step back here, and I want you to introduce yourself as to what you do and how it is that you knew what young people, the kind of people who are now sickening the entire world by going out to bars in the United States, disregarding the lockdown common sense, but nevertheless an important and affluent demographic. How is it that you knew about these people? Tell them what it is you do actually for a living, what you were doing specifically at that time in character as an actor who was making a working actor, making a living doing.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good idea, because it does shed a little bit of light on where my intuition came into play in this case, because I'm older than the demographic that's consuming Netflix at an enormous rate right now, a little bit. But I was connected to the 20-something age bracket in a pretty unique way. Along with doing my Charlie Chaplin work as an actor and going around the world and doing the things that I do, I was approached because of that perhaps I could create a new character for a nightclub in Barrie, Ontario, which is about an hour drive north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. It was a nightclub called Johnson's Residence. And the owner was interested in having a very unique, brand new character and having an actor develop this character. He was a character of a butler, and he wanted him to be called Jeeves. And I was asked to do it. So I thought long and hard about it, and I thought, sure, I can create this character, but what would I do with it? What do you want to do? I was to be at the nightclub all night, every Friday and Saturday night, something I never ever did. I didn't go to the nightclub, extremely rare occasion, and did I do that growing up. But I was to do this every Friday and Saturday as somebody in my mid 40s. So yeah, sure, I'll try that. So I modeled it after Charlie Chaplin's Tramp character, and a mixture of that and C-3PO from Star Wars. So those two characters mixed together, you get Jeeves Edwards, who is a butler. If you were to go to jeevesedwards.com, you'd find a lot of information, or just type in Jeeves Edwards, Canada, whatever, you'd get me. Then I have black hair and so on. So it allowed me to work face-to-face with this demographic that is consuming films and television at an entirely different rate than we did growing up. It's something that I was able to catch on to. I needed to know everybody's way of talking online, how to do it on social media, how to work with Facebook. And I got some pretty interesting concepts out of it. So mixing that with what I want to see with Charlie Chaplin, I'm thinking we definitely need to see a Chaplin miniseries. And when your book landed in my hand about Red Letter Days, the two connected instantly. And I thought that's exactly what has to happen. But of course, it's morphed since then. So yeah, my idea came from that. It's a little long-winded, but it is important to explain that because of the way we're going to consume series now.
Actors have to do a lot of things, as I have done. I started, in a sense, making my living when I was 12, doing magic shows and for birthday parties and such. But any actor I've ever spoken to, you know, we all cobble together a living. We're ultimate freelancers. And Jason has found one niche in doing a brilliant Charlie Chaplin impersonation, but he's also written plays with the character. He's made a lot of little movies. When I say little, I mean short movies with new Charlie Chaplin movies, as it were, and a series as his character Jeeves, which he's too modest to say because he's Canadian, it became an enormous success. And so for several years, Jeeves became a celebrity in the Toronto, in that whole region, and the nightclub was hugely successful. Red Letter Days, let me take you back to what that came from. A British film professor named David James is a specialist in popular culture, and he was at the British Library researching early music hall and early movie magazines and reviews and characters. And he found in 1916, there was an article in a magazine called Red Letter. And for none of us know this in North America, Red Letter is the equivalent of our, it's sort of a cross between People magazine and Red Book. It was Red Letter for the family circle, which is always code meaning for women. And sort of like People, celebrity gossip for the family or, women. And most of it was just, kind of a press agent junk. But all of a sudden in 1916, there's a very substantial article written by a member of Charlie Chaplin's acting company, not a super well-known one like Eric Campbell, who plays the giant villain in all the Mutual films, or Edna, who of course was his leading lady, a minor actor, but he's in all these films from 1915 and 16, and he was also a journalist. He was a British actor, and he was a journalist who'd written for the New York Times, and he starts writing pieces for extra dough, the Red Letter, and the next issue has another one, and the next issue another one. This was a weekly magazine, and David, going through it, was startled to find there were 37 articles, which constitutes a living record, the only thing of its kind, of an eyewitness report of Chaplin at work as he's exploding into world fame with the S&A films, and then all through the Mutual period as well. When I got wind of this in a scholarly journal, my friend Human, who was acting as our technical director today, hi Human, behind the scenes, who will be helping with a question and answer soon. I said, you got to get this published. And he said, well, I have no idea how to do that. And I did, however, because I'd had earlier books published. So I thought a good title for that would be Charlie Chaplin's Red Letter Days. And I'm not the author, but I'm the author of all the annotations, the editor had a brilliant idea. Footnotes are annoying, basically, in a book. John Barrymore famously said a footnote, let me how I can clean this up. He said, it's like having to go answer the door while you're in the midst of lovemaking. So the editor had a brilliant idea of putting my annotations in the text, just italicizing them. So it's kind of, his Fred Goodwin's is the name of the actor, his newsy letters about what's going on with all the Brits who are having pub crawls every night as Charlie's trying to think of what to do next, and what it's like on the set as he's working, and my annotations, putting it into context. Anyway, that's the book that Jason thought would be a great mini-series, and I thought, right start, terrible idea, because who wants to read about, it's too limited. It's only a period of 2 years. Not that Chaplin's life wasn't so rich, but what I did have, as Jason presented the idea, was I had worked up a novel about Chaplin's childhood, a full-length novel written for teens, really, and old and young adults about Chaplin's childhood, because that in itself is a fascinating, it might as well be written by Charles Dickens, not comparing to my writing, but the source material of his childhood. And Jason read that and said, well, here we are, here's season 1. And of course, we were off and running and brainstorming with each other. And Jason, it turned out, is a wonderful graphic designer as well as and filmmaker, as well as my friend Zhao, who's been so helpful in many ways, is in the crowd. Hello, Zhao. Nice to see you again. My speaker's not working, or use a different speaker. Can you hear me? Am I silent, Jason?
No, I can hear you. You have a little bit of like a crunchiness to your microphone.
Okay. How about now? Is this better?
Yeah, to me, so far. It's intermittent.
Changing speakers. How about this speaker? Is that better?
So far, yes.
Okay, good. We were off and running, and what we've done is goaded each other on and developed the concept and for essentially a 3-year mini-series, which we have which we're about to start really seriously shopping around, having evolved the concept this far. And Jason, why don't you introduce what we're about to show them about our project?
Yeah, sure. It was a bit of a learning curve to figure out. So how do you penetrate into Hollywood and try to get something onto Netflix? You just call up Netflix and get them to do it. It's not so easy. We're still at that stage of learning. What we do know is we need to have all our ducks in a row. And in order to do that, you have to know what you're pitching. You have to have the product, and then you actually have to kind of tantalize them with something, with visuals, whether it be back in the day, maybe it was just paper, maybe whatever. But in this case, we've gone ahead and we've created a little video. We didn't create the video for today. It's still a work in progress. Now, what we're talking about is a fully fledged three-season series for streaming on something like Netflix or Amazon Prime or the like. So that's 3 seasons, 10 seasons, or 10 episodes per season. And every single episode has been figured out and outlined. And that's what Dan has definitely worked at for the last 2 years on this. So now what we have to do is put that all together and try and show people that this can be sold and viewed. And why is it relevant today to people in 2020 or 2021? Why would we want to watch Charlie Chaplin on our Netflix? And to answer that, we've watched The Crown. We've watched a lot of things that are done in a more modern way, a different angle of viewing, with a lot more entertainment value for everybody to watch, rather than just a documentary, which are all extremely golden. But we want to see something. We want to be walking beside Chaplin or get a little bit more. So what we had to do was create this little video, and that's where I come in, is I'm trying to package together all the things that are inside of Dan's head and put them together into what I think somebody interviewing us or we're interviewing would be interested in our product. So I want to show you that video right now, but I got to tell you, it's still a work in progress. Remember, it's 3 seasons. Season 1 called The Kid, and season 2 called The Tramp, and season 3 called Modern Times. So Dan's given those titles to each season, and for anybody who knows Chaplin, for obvious reasons, and as it would show once you get to know it, this is just to outline it. Let Dan's got something to say here.
I just wanted to add, what we have to prove to people in the industry who are, got dollar signs. If it's not going to be commercial, they're not going to be interested. Why is Charlie Chaplin worth a mini series? And the answer for us, and I think for many of you who have tuned into us today, is that his life is just too rich, too long, too filled with events that entangle with the events of the primary events of the 20th century, both world wars, the McCarthy era, the birth of stardom, as well as being a great story of himself. It is a story of all of us. And that's what I think makes him so compelling in a way that any other actor or show business figure is not. We love Alfred Hitchcock, but we don't care about how he voted or, really that much about his private life. Whereas with Chaplin, his private and his on-screen persona both got just entangled and keeps getting somehow entangled in the events that concern us. So here's the video we're working on to develop that. We very much like your feedback. Jason, as I said, is I think a fabulous filmmaker, and we're all going to see just how fabulous he is right now.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Now remember, this is not actually the series we're watching. We're watching a sampler of the concept that we would present to somebody who would be interested in coughing up the dough for it. So here we go. Without further ado, I'm just going to share this now. This is just hot off the press. Literally, while we were beginning this conversation, I was just exporting the file. So you'll see parts of it when we get into season 2. I'll just have text saying that content goes here. and then it'll flash to white because I've cut out all the middle. It's also kind of private because you don't need to know it all right now. And same with season 3. But all of season 1 has got a good flesh out for you to get an idea of the kind of presentation we're doing. So here we go. I'll shut up now. So here we go.
Hi, this is Dan Kamin. While we're getting the projector set up, I'd like to introduce you to my friend and co-conspirator, Jason Allin. Jason is a talented actor whose portrayal of Charlie Chaplin has taken him around the world.
And Dan does comedy in theaters and with symphony orchestras worldwide. He doesn't play Chaplin in his shows, but he trained Robert Downey Jr. to play him for his Oscar-nominated performance. I think he knows more about Chaplin than anyone in the world.
Thank you, Jason. So before telling you about our Chaplin project, let's introduce the man himself. Our story begins in Victorian London, where Charlie is born to 2 up-and-coming music hall performers. But their promising careers are cut short by her infidelities and his alcoholism. Abandoned by her husband, Charlie's mother is left scrambling to support Charlie and his half-brother, even as a fog of madness envelops her. Charlie has to survive poverty, homelessness, and the horrors of a Dickensian orphanage. But by the time he's 9, his budding theatrical talents earn him a job with a troupe of precision clog dancers. When the tour ends, he's once again homeless and hungry. Eventually, he bluffs his way into a part in the first stage play about Sherlock Holmes. He's a hit, but soon finds that his real talent lies in knockabout comedy. His ability to take funny falls doesn't prepare him for the pain of falling in love, though. And when the beautiful Hetty Kelly, a young dancer, breaks his heart, he flees to a new life in the new world. There, Hollywood beckons. When his first film flops, he desperately conjures an entirely new character out of some mismatched clothing and the memories of his childhood. And the tramp is born.
The tramp's behavior on screen is absolutely deplorable, but hilariously funny. The public falls in love with him at first sight, and within 2 years, he is the most beloved person on the planet. Money, sex, and celebrity mingle together in an intoxicating brew. Men want to be him, and women want to bed him, and scandals soon follow, including 2 shotgun marriages in a row. But it takes him over 2 years to make it. And by the time it comes out, people are lining up to be scared out of their wits by Frankenstein. Yet City Lights, a bittersweet romantic comedy, turns out to be the surprise hit of the year, the apex of Charlie's mimetic art. but he knows that the silent era is finished, and with it, his beloved tramp. So he decides to throw in the towel and retire.
Exhausted and drained, Charlie sets off on a world tour. He basks in the undiminished affections of the public and the company of the rich and famous. But everywhere he goes, he sees the horrific effects of the Depression. He's itching to get back to work. But what work? Then he meets the fiery Paulette Goddard, whose pluck inspires him to bring the tramp back as a factory worker driven crazy by his job on the assembly line. And the public is not amused by the dark comedy. He makes a film about a washed-up comedian trying to make a comeback. He previews the film for an elite Hollywood audience. When they burst into cheers at the end, for Charlie, life and art, past and present, blur together. His parents beam at him from the wings. Friends in the house morph into the friends of bygone days. And in the front row, he looks into the smiling face of his beautiful wife, Una, and sees in it the faces of all the women he's ever loved, lingering at the end on Hetty, the one that got away. But this time it's too late to save the day with a film. Limelight is boycotted all over America, and Charlie is unceremoniously booted out of his adopted country.
But that's not the end of the story. 20 years later, with the Vietnam War raging and the country divided like never before, Charlie returns in triumph to accept a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. When he steps on stage, he receives the longest standing ovation in Oscar history.
Jason, I think I'm speaking for the audience who cannot speak for themselves by saying bravo. I haven't seen a lot of that. And a lot of it was done over the last few days. Thank you. That was just terrific. Folks, if you have any comments or questions, as you can see, we're kind of stating our case here, and we're preaching to the choir here. Although there's some of you might be out there, not just because you're chaplain buffs, but I imagine most of you are. Let me just tie it in together by saying that, we hesitated. We don't intend to show much chaplain footage, if any, during the series. We've got to earn our own respect from the audience. However, there will be some chaplain footage from very early films that, as you saw incorporated here, probably to do the reverse of what we did here. We're intending to end the series because we don't want to depict, we don't want to dramatize the last 20 years. We want to show it sort of like we showed you the introduction here today is our concept. So you see the real Charlie, in action, because ultimately, if you show the real Charlie first, no actor has a prayer, as Robert Downey, my dear Robert Downey, did such a fantastic job, but there's no contest. As the film critic and my friend Scott Iman once said, you can talk about any comedian you want, but 10 seconds of looking at any Charlie Chaplin film sets the standard. or something like that, he said. So out of our own, and I was just making the point that it's been such a thrill for me, and I think for you too, Jason, to be invited and to have attended the Chaplain's Day celebration over the last, this is the 4th year actually we would have been here, because that road that he walks down at the end, you know, I've driven over it over and over again. I mean, we can't walk down it because it's a traveled highway. It's paved now. But all the other locations that the folks there have so well documented, the bungalow where Charlie stayed with Bronco Billy Anderson when he was first auditioning here, or first arriving here to work, it's all there. People are living in it now. And so it's a great treasure that this thing has been preserved thanks to David Keene, Rena Keene, and all, you know, Michael Bonham, all of you volunteers, Dorothy, you know who you are from the company. It's a precious legacy. And I would like to say, for those of you who haven't been there, they do things that no other museum that I've ever been in. Chaplin and Keaton, all the silent comedians talked about how they missed the sound of the silent silent camera, because the camera wasn't silent. It was going click, 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 like the cards on a bicycle's spokes. And they have one there that you can click, several of them, so you can see how heavy they were to move, and be even more awed by any moving camera shots in silent movies. And it's truly been a labor of love and a great treasure for all of us who love film. So Human, do we have anybody that's got anything that they would like to? We had some nice comments I noticed on people. Anybody would like to ask any questions of Jason?
Yeah, we've had a number of questions in writing, but anybody who wants to ask a question themselves can just raise their hand and we'll call on you. But let's go to the written questions first.
There should be a hand icon. Tell them about the hand icon.
Yeah, there's a raise hand icon on the bottom of your screen. So if you raise that up, we'll hand the microphone over to you. We'll give you permission to request unmuting, and then you can unmute it yourself. So anyway, let's start with the written questions since we don't have any hands up yet. And our old pal Rob Farr is taking a realistic view here. He says, we all know and love Chaplin, but how is he still widely known to the average Netflix viewer, especially since his feature films aren't available via streaming since Filmstruck went RIP. So he's just being a little realistic there.
Jason, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that. That was my very first thought. I was actually inspired by watching Netflix. By watching Netflix, and specifically, and I've said this many times to Dan, he's sick of hearing about The Crown, about Queen Elizabeth. You know, being under the British rule here in Canada, I didn't know a heck of a lot about the royal family until I watched The Crown. And I was really impressed by Queen Elizabeth. Now, I didn't expect that kind of turnaround in opinion about our queen. And I don't mean that I didn't like her in the first place. It's just I didn't know enough about her. In other words, I got educated just by watching the series. And I know there are some artistic parts of it. There were probably some fictional portions of it, I'm sure. But I have a greater respect for the monarchy and for Queen Elizabeth. So that, of course, it's going to stew in my mind. Why can't we do that with Chaplin? I mean, we have a fantastic visual of Robert Downey Jr. portraying him for us, but it's now in the past, and the film is not complete enough, as we've mentioned here. Dan's written, it's just a life too vast for one film. It's even too vast for 30 episodes, but there's also missing parts, and that's where Dan comes in with his artistry and his writing. And being a great historian can link all those bits together with a lot of great cinema. So, and he's a great screenwriter, and I think it would fly very well on Netflix. It's actually something I'd be chomping at the bit. If I ever heard something was coming, I'd want it to be done in a modern style. I definitely want it to be a little more tongue-in-cheek, I guess, a little more, maybe some special effects. And that's pretty much what Dan and I have gone for. Dan, maybe you can explain how it's structured a little bit, because the way that people consume and binge watching on Netflix, they instantly get all 10 episodes, and they will either sit there and watch it from beginning to end or over a span of a couple of weeks, whatever. But you've actually written the structure of every single episode, and I think everybody would like to hear that.
Well, let me address the question too. You know, who would have thought that a kitschy television show about a guy who wears a cape would become a huge movie franchise called Superman? Who would have thought a tongue-in-cheek, very of its moment, kitschy TV series about Batman would spawn that franchise, or that Wonder Woman would suddenly come from another kitschy TV series and a very strange comic book. The fact is, if that initial Superman film by Christopher Reeve wasn't a hit, there would have been no second. There would have been no sequel. It's up to us. It's on us. And we talked, Jason and I talked a lot about, do we want to, even for our presentation that we're doing in this this little preview reel, do we want to use the real Charlie Chaplin? And then it hit me one day. I just woke up and I realized we can't sell Charlie Chaplin as well as he does. And so putting together, as you all, I think we're in a group of the choir here. You know, you saw all those films out of context. So the struggle, the challenge for us writing was to put them together in a new way. So we're telling our story, but allowing Charlie, without compromise, to do what he does that is so mesmerizing to watch. Because what was mesmerizing about Charlie was that his comedy was the ultimate visual comedy. And by that I mean the subject of his humor were the things that nobody thinks about anymore. What caught people's attention first was he walked funny. He turned the corner funny. He learned to tip his hat. He would tip it like this, like a stovepipe or a cigar lid, a cigar box lid. He moved in a way that nobody else moved, but that turned everyday things like lighting a cigarette, turning a corner into comedy bits. And there were dozens of songs in 1915 written about just the way he walked. You'll see one of those tomorrow, giving a plug to our Chaplin imitation contest. Among the other things, a wonderful, one of the pianists who occasionally plays at the Niles S&A Silent Film Edison Theater for the live showings is going to sing a song written by Jerome Kern in 1915 called The Chaplin Walk, because everybody was fascinated. And the thing about Chaplin that helped him get so famous is everybody could imitate him. Everybody was imitating him. The songs are about people's imitating. And so the first thing is that we had to in order to do this, we have to find a way to channel that. The challenge for us would be like you're doing a biofilm about Robin Williams, but you're doing the drama of his life and his horrible childhood, and you don't show him being funny. The challenge for us is we have to be really funny in the way that Charlie was funny, not just on screen, but at parties. So, you know, that makes him a compelling character that people are going to want to come back and see what he's up to next week, as well as a child who survived the most horrendous conditions that any child could survive, literally homeless and in Dickens type of London. Go ahead, Jason. Yeah,
and to further answer the question of what is it something that would fly on Netflix, or why should it be on Netflix? And given the current temperature of society right now with the Me Too movement, that's something I noticed that there's a question there from an anonymous viewer. That's extremely important. Dan and I talked for a long time on that one because it is less than favorable at times for what Charlie's been through in his past, and what happened when he worked or he had affairs with people. Dan's going to fill in the blanks here with all the accurate historical information, but we did talk about it at length. It's something that you can't really just throw up on the screen and say he was a great man in every single way, because he did, he he was fragile in many ways, and he had weaknesses, and he had a lot of power. So that is addressed. And Dan and I kind of hit a bit of a roadblock with that until Dan wrote a very good segment about it, and a good argument of, well, this is actually what happened, and we can explain it this way. And it does include a female in his life. So maybe Dan, could you address the Me Too concept that we had as a roadblock?
Yeah, we were told by somebody from Hollywood who was giving us advice about developing and presenting this, that that it will be ultimately it's going to be judged by women producers. Women are going to be involved in the decision, and if he seems to be the kind of character who is a predator by today's standards, nobody's going to make it. But he faced challenges that nobody else challenged. He became the most famous person not only in the world, but the most famous person he ever lived. So when he would walk into a restaurant, every head would swivel towards him. I've hung out with movie stars, and I can tell you, they live a different life. People throw themselves at them. They deal with very unique challenges, and they're given power that's easy to abuse because, in a sense, people, as we said in the bit of the narration. I don't know if you could hear it because the sound mix was a little probably deliberately, so you didn't actually hear our all the revelations. But you know, men want to be him, women want to bed him. Rena actually made me change that for our main commercial for the Red Letter Days program, which I'm doing tomorrow night. She said that's a little bit raw. But, you know, there are postcards that show it. You know, I'll be proving it tomorrow night. There are postcards that show a woman flirting with a Charlie Chaplin cutout saying, "Chase me, Charlie." And another one with kissing, "We have to kiss Charlie," because all of this little bad doggerel poem about everybody's at sea except nobody to squeeze excepting Charlie Chaplin. I'll be introducing that tomorrow night, tomorrow at 5 at our Red Letter Days program, which started to be something, by the way, to give a plug, based on the book that Fred Goodwin's that I got published, the fascinating eyewitness story of Charlie at that little point in his life, but morphed into something a little larger. It morphed into a story about how Charlie Chaplin's fame exploded at the same time as the bombs started exploding in World War I. And we asked, why is he relevant now? Because he was relevant then, and he got mixed up with the war in very odd ways. He got death threats because he wasn't fighting, you know, and eventually he did something unthinkable, which we're going to show tomorrow night, which my good friend Zhao, who is on our call today from South America, from Brazil, helped me to find, first of all, an original print that's closer to what you'll see in the contemporary Chaplin Review print of Shoulder Arms, because Chaplin found the original materials when he released it in the late 50s to be worn out. But we had access to an earlier print that was shown in the 20s, and Zhao helped me put that together in and clean it up so that you see what the audience was seeing, what the fuss was about, because he did something that's hard to get your head around now. He made a film about a war that was still going on. There has been no film about 9/11, folks. We don't find that funny. Well, World War I, there were 21 million people killed. They didn't find it funny either, and Chaplin himself was ready to pitch it until his friend Douglas Fairbanks, he asked him what he thought, and Douglas Fairbanks couldn't answer because he was laughing so hard. He says, "You got to put this out." And it became something that changed the whole movie industry, because films were still one step away from the fairground in the hardware store against the sheet side of the wall kind of attraction, and that put them to a different level, like art should be. Films were not considered art by many people in 1918 when that film came out. So, because Chaplin kept getting involved with the zeitgeist, with the McCarthy era, he was a victim of the McCarthy era, and so on. There's a story to tell. And it's a compelling story, as we said in the end of our video, because his story is truly our story. Now, we all share something. I think all of you, I think I could speak for just about everybody who's out there watching, because Chaplin's work itself you know, you don't need it to be mediated by Jason or me or anybody else. You know, that work itself has had a powerful effect on our lives. And the only thing that makes us different and weird is because we're not living in 1918 where everybody had the same feeling. And some of the scandals that Chaplin experienced in his life would not have been forgiven any other actor. It's just that his films had proven indispensable, had lifted the mood of a nation, of a world at war, while the war was still happening. And it was recognized by just about everybody that he's doing something very important that's contributing just as much as if he was a 5'5" soldier in the trenches. So anyway, Red Letter Days morphed into that story, the story about Charlie and the war. I just kept the name Red Letter Days because it began about a book. It began as a book talk, and it morphed. And we're going to have original music that has been pre-recorded for the film by John Marsalis, who's familiar to all of you from California, because he accompanies a lot of the films at the Niles S.A. Silent Film Museum. Enough plugs. Another question, please.
Now we've got Dominique in Paris, or in France, I should say. I don't think he's in Paris. He's got his hand up, and it must be late there. So let's hand the mic over to him.
Always takes a moment to get the technology up.
Dominique, are you there?
Well, we can hum that song about the nuns. Was it sung by the nuns or was it about nuns? Remember that song, that annoying song?
Oh, he's not. Oh wait, no, there he is. There he is. Are you there, Dominique?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Roman. So, do you think we have to justify, and I mean the word justify, events that took place more than 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago? I think we don't have to justify. We have to explain the context.
Right.
Given to the Roman Polanski story in France and many others, and Russell Weinstein and many others, Chaplin in some websites is now considered as a pedophile. I'm sorry, I'm not fluent in English. A pedophile man.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Okay. So, what is your opinion about that? About that circulation of fake news or transformed news? You know.
I think it's proper that we deal with it. I'm all for the Me Too movement. I have
Yep.
you know, I have a daughter. You know, and
So am I. So have I.
But I think if these things are put into, you know, there are trends. You know, almost all the biographies that were written about Chaplin up till the 1950s, early 50s, were, you know, very, they excused all of his peccadillos, as it were, and, you know, minimized news about some of the less pleasant aspects of his life, including things that happened in his childhood, including some of the lawsuits he got involved in, including, you know, some of the women whose feelings he hurt very much. But the reality is, we've all hurt each other's feelings. That's the risk we take when we fall in love and relate to other people. And you know, Chaplin just lived in a glaring spotlight that actually magnified his misdeed. Most of the things, there won't be revelations to anybody who's ever read a biography, because unfortunately most of Chaplin's misdeeds were headline news. They became the tabloid headline news of the day. His trial became the trial of the century, the first divorce scandal of the century, and so on. The only difference is that somehow other people who got divorced, their careers ended because they were just considered to, as Ingrid Bergman's did when she left her husband for the Italian director Roberto Rossellini. In the 1950s, it effectively ended her career in America for many years. That's in the 1950s. Things change, things keep changing. So you're quite right, Dominique. Things simply have to be put in context. He was a human being, as somebody else, my friend Jessica, put a comment up. He was a human. And our job is to make sure that he is seen as human at the same time as we show the superhuman aspect of him, which was his astonishing ability to channel human experience into physical, visual, visceral comedy. Because I don't know about you folks, you're all film buffs, but I haven't seen other films made in 1914 and 1915 that make me laugh, but the Chaplin Keystones still do. They're still, he was onto something that hasn't dated in the way that even TV sitcoms from the 1960s have dated, or 70s. Somehow it doesn't date. At the same time, standards change and they have to be addressed, and I'm fine with that. What do you think, Jason?
Well, it was an initial thought even before Dan and I had the discussion about Me Too movement. But it was my original idea was from sitting on the couch and watching television and seeing, what do I want to see? If I were somebody who was against Chaplin, obviously I never would have gone so far to even have that thought. But if it were that I felt he was a pedophile for some reason, or I felt that he married young, which Irina mentioned here, that marrying young and being a pedophile are two very different things, especially given the era. Everybody married young at the time. You add another very potent portion to it, and he was the most powerful, most famous person on the planet, probably the youngest at the time, who never had the tools or the front runner to actually teach him of how to behave in such a situation. So being human is definitely an element. Those are things that people want to see in dramas. Those are things in fictional characters that we write in order to see their flaws. This was a living, breathing character that lived all these mistakes, and it's actually part of our history. It's why we have awareness now. It's hard to say, well, we'll give him credit for that, but we do have to be sensitive to the people and the viewers today, the way that we consume the product and the sensitive topics that we address in it. And we got to be careful that we don't go back and rewrite history just for the sake of some people who might not like it. We want to show the history, and we want to get it accurate, but we also need to be sensitive for the modern eyes. That was something I definitely thought about right from the beginning. And still, it just drove me to realize I do want to see all this. I certainly don't advocate marrying young people, but I am not from that era. And so pedophilia is, I don't know if that's a topic to discuss about here. I don't even know. I'm sure people will have opinions.
Well, the legal age of consent for centuries was 12 years old. And then it went in the Victorian era from 12 to 14, and then 16. And standards change. I mean, if anybody remembers Fellini's movie called Satyricon, it's a wild movie, one of his last great movies about ancient Rome. And they're doing a stage performance with slaves. Slaves were being the actors, and somebody got their hand chopped off in the course of a performance as part of the entertainment. And that's so bizarre to us now. But at the end of the movie, it ends with the characters walking along a beach, and suddenly they dissolve into a frieze, a little tile picture of themselves stuck in time, but it's now. And it just hit me. It was the height of the Vietnam War, and it hit me, when people look back at our time, they're going to look at, Vietnam War, these people were crazy. What are they thinking, blowing themselves up and napalming a forest? Everything is, that's what we love movies for, because they put things in context for us. They give us models of behavior. Fred Astaire taught us what it's like and how we act when we fall in love. If we're really that much in love, that's how we move. And Charlie taught us grace under pressure, because he's always under extreme pressure. And we're going to be capitalizing and showcasing that. When he was making The Circus, that beautiful film that's just like cotton candy, it just seems like just pure pleasure. His first marriage exploded his second shotgun marriage exploded in the headlines. The government sued him for $1 million in back taxes, going back almost 10 years. His circus tent burned down. 6 months of footage was ruined by a laboratory tech's error, scratching the film, the negative. Plus, he was sued for plagiarizing shoulder arms with somebody who submitted a three-page plot description of the film, and you know, he had to go to court and testify. How did he make such a joyful comedy out of living that life? That's what fascinates Jason and I think all of us who are so fascinated with Chaplin. How can such pain, such stress, such catastrophe, your mother going crazy and your dad being an alcoholic who drinks himself to death before you're 12 and you haven't lived with him anyway, how could out of that he become the poet of poverty, the great, you know, come up with gags like he does in The Kid, where he first finds the kid after people are dumping garbage at him from alley windows, and you know, the first great joke in The Kid is he hears the kid crying by a garbage can, and what does he do? And that's a joke that makes you laugh and makes you go, oh. And it's that depth of art that we're not going to copy. Our responsibility is doing our own work of art about the guy who did that. We're not, by and large, going to be copying a lot of his gags. We hope we're going to come up with our own.
Yeah, yeah, and we kind of realize that we're going to get a lot of questions like that. And remember, this is just a concept at this point. We're not going into production at this time. There's also probably a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of resources behind them that will ultimately tell us what we'll be doing with the Chaplin series. And we could probably have an entire discussion on the Me Too movement and how it connects with Funnyman all day long, I guess. But we have some very excited people here that I would like to know, how excited are you? I mean, because I've been so excited, and I know Dan's been excited to, I don't know, I've been visualizing this like crazy for, I'm going to tell you 3 years plus solid now. Well, it's more than that now, I guess. 3 years solid for me, visualizing a Chaplin miniseries. And just to be clear, this isn't using footage of Chaplin in the finished product. The idea is to make a brand new footage. We've got things like Hollywood, which Dan and I have discussed. That Hollywood is a series that's on Netflix right now. It is nothing like that. That is more of a current flavor of the week style show, not to knock it, but that is not the type of historical document that we're trying to create with our series. It's very entertaining, and it works very well with certain audiences. We're not looking for that. Crown, and I read through, somebody did say it's a good parallel to The Crown, which I've said right from day one. I used that as an example with Dan in Skillet, at Skillet that morning. But yeah, the creation process has been absolutely amazing. Dan and I have spent a lot of hours on the phone. Weird times of the day, I'd get a phone call or an email with the most random thought, which just ignites me, and I would fire it back, and it's fantastic. I love it also.
We'd like to hear more from you, and don't worry, there will not be a GoFundMe post up at the end of this. We're still at the early stages, and we really want to go mainstream if possible with this, because obviously to do something at this scope, to allow us to stretch out 30 hours, which this life, of course, as we all agree, deserves, needs to really unfold properly, you know, is going to take some powerful allies. So please, we welcome your comments or questions.
Oh, Dan, I see one here from Stephen Bainborough. Stephen Bainborough is my drama teacher through high school. The reason, the single solitary reason that I've gone so far with my acting, that man right there, Stephen Bainborough. So he's mentioned that Jessica Bates has a great comment write in one sentence pitch. If you write a one sentence pitch, what would it be? I would totally send that over to Dan, because he's written every single episode as the TV guide. I don't even know what you call it, the little blurb to tell you exactly what every episode is. So it exists. Every one does exist. But then he has every season a blurb for that. And then he has the all-encompassing, the whole series itself as a package. And I'm pretty sure he'll come up with a sentence now if we just give him the mic.
Well, something like, you know, he rises from the Dickensian slums to find that life at the top can be just as perilous. Something like that. Jessica is a good friend of mine who is a brilliantly London-trained American actress who lives in San Francisco, as a matter of fact, quite close to Niles.
Yeah, and got a question there. Any thoughts about casting? That's something we've talked about as far as breaking out the characters and how, and obviously the title character, Charles himself, how would that be cast? And it wouldn't be one actor because that guy would also have to play a very young Chaplin in season 1. Dan and I talked about it. He's got more experience with that than I, and yeah.
I was hoping to play all the roles myself.
That was my initial dream while sitting on the couch. Man, I can just see Dan Kamin run with this. He'd make such a good clogger.
You just have to shrink down about a foot. I'm about 6'3½".
Yeah, well, there's special effects now, so.
Someone who wants to be anonymous says, is it your intention to write the episodes yourselves, or would you be putting together a writing team?
Yeah, that was a good question. Dan and I talked about that too, and with his experience, he's informed me of how the process could go and what could happen to us in the process.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, having been privileged to be involved with several movies and watched how the drafts changed, the various drafts. I think all the drafts of the movie, the Robert Downey movie about Chaplin, and I was involved with one with Johnny Depp called Benny and June, and some others. It was a really wonderful thing to say to see how fluid things were and how things kept changing right up to the day of shooting sometimes. And but you know, realistically, there are things that, you know, Jason and I, you know, have not experienced. You know, exactly what is a showrunner, for example, on a thing like this. People who are in charge. You know, what we have a handle on is who this guy was and how to make his story dramatic, I think. And so obviously, you know, they're like, for example, Lord of the Rings, which is why I thought of 30 episodes over 3 years, because every year of Lord of the Rings was 10 episodes. And these two guys were considered the creators. There was a novelist and there were two creators, and they sometimes wrote them, but a lot of times they didn't. So a lot of that is going to boil down to just who ends up being the creative team. Obviously, you know, Jason and I would unless somebody, you know, is making us an offer here and now today, because go put up that GoFundMe, Jason, or you know, just purchase it right here on the, you know, we don't know. Those are questions we don't know, and we're up for collaboration because both of us love collaborating. We've loved collaborating with each other. I should mention too, another plug, the other thing that Jason will be involved in is tomorrow, the Charlie Chaplin contest, which is an annual feature of the Niles S&A Chaplin Day celebration, is going to happen online, of course. People have sent us things from all over the world, and one of the people that sent us their Charlie Chaplin video is none other than our own Jason Allin, who's created a new little story about life during the lockdown, and it's very, very funny. You'll see Jason's cinematic as well as his beautiful ability to do Chaplin. I mean, you know, I think you should play Billy West in the movie, you know, at least. Or maybe, you know, who knows? Maybe we could get. Oh, I'm blocking on her name. Who is the one who the woman, Charlie Minerva Courtney was the female Charlie Chaplin impersonator who made 3 movies in 1915. She made 3 Charlie Chaplin movies. I think only one of them may survive, and she's pretty darn good. but you know, that's one of the great things about Chaplin is everybody could draw him and everybody could do him. Everybody could, you know, tip their hat or move like him. And, you know, that's the way I reacted when I saw my first Charlie Chaplin film. It was compulsive. I started carrying my umbrella, my long umbrella, whether it was raining or shining, because it started to seem to take on a life of its own. I was just fascinated, you know, because you get the same pleasure watching Chaplin, and we will have to give people that pleasure, whoever is playing Chaplin, that you get watching Fred Astaire. I mean, it's just like life is a dance. And we know from the newsreel footage that we all find it a treasure to see whenever any of the home movie footage, that for Chaplin, pretty much all the time, life was a dance. He doesn't, when I was working with Robert, one of the first things I started working with him on was how you sit down in a chair, because Robert would sit down like this. You know, he was a typical late 20th century schlumpy guy, and Chaplin would sit down like this. You know, everything looked like a dance, and it's that dance has to be in our film, not his dance, our version of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and finding the right people for it, it really, we don't make those decisions unless we had a pocket full of money, and we're producing this right now. So the point is, we're at the stage of wanting to pitch this to somebody that has the power to bring this to fruition. But those people would be the people that would decide who's going to be cast in it. And I hope that it does Chaplin justice and all the other characters. But yeah, I'd like to play West. I think still take that as a compliment to play West in a Dan Kamin written series. That's a huge compliment. So.
Billy West story, almost Funnyman. Billy West, for those of you who don't know, was Chaplin's primary rival. For 5 years, he made Charlie Chaplin-like films, and he had enough artistic integrity that he wasn't like some others imitating. He was imitating all the movements. He did it better than anybody except Chaplin. And Chaplin once stopped him on the street when he was shooting, when West was shooting, and said, "You're a damn good imitator." And he didn't sue West as he did some other people, because West was making his own comedies, and essentially, you know, they're hard to watch now because they're not very funny. The humor doesn't hold up very much, but his impersonation is uncanny. And by the way, his Eric Campbell, his villain in his early films for the first year or so was Oliver Hardy. Oliver Hardy, 1916. Who of course went on to achieve great fame as part of the team of Amos and Andy. Wait, that wasn't the wrong team. Allin Hardy. Oh, did I say something wrong? I'm sorry. Any other questions?
Yeah, Lincoln has his hand up, so let's hand the mic over to him.
President.
Just asking you to unmute, Lincoln.
Thank you again, Human, for organizing all this tech so that Jason and I are free to just talk.
Yeah, I've already asked the question. It was the one about casting.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Lincoln.
Sure.
Let's see, Zhao is asking a question about the cut scene from The Cure in the Attenborough film. Can you, Dan, give some more information about that?
Zhao, you didn't find that, did you? I don't think that's ever been released. So in the Attenborough film, some of you might remember, there's a sequence in which Charlie meets Edna Purviance in a restaurant. And then we cut to them, she's sitting in a restaurant, but she's in costume, and they're making The Immigrant, and she's eating beans. And there's jokes made about she's gonna get sick if she eats one more plate of beans. In the original film, there was a 3-minute montage between those two scenes in which their relationship is sketched. We watched and we staged some of Robert's best work, I think. There was a wonderful scene where he's in the Chaplin's Cure costume and he's in a gazebo. We made up our own Cure scene where he's just sort of spinning, doing a nice little spin and landing on the bench in a gazebo. There was a scene also, I don't think this stuff has ever been released in any, in the extras on the DVD. There was a scene, they edited it together, however. There was a scene in which Charlie and Edna are alone in the Adventurer set, the exterior of the house in the Adventurer, and he's in his tux, and they are dancing the tango. And Charlie dips Edna, and she reaches up and peels his mustache off and tosses it away, and they kiss. It had a lot of lovely moments in it, and them driving along and singing a song, and it was quite some of the best stuff. It was simply cut for time, because in those days, in those pre-binging television days that we're all in now, everything was in movie theaters, and a movie that ran longer than 2 hours and 15 minutes was a problem, because you can only show it once in an evening, and so it was thought to be less commercial, and everybody has to keep the eye on the bottom line making a movie, because the meter is going at $10,000 a second. That's the story of that little outtake. So Joe, if you found a copy of that, I would like to know about it.
I think he says in writing that he only has a still. I don't think he does the film.
Oh yeah, stills came out. The Joe, as I said, is my Brazilian collaborator who helped put together the print of Shoulder Arms, which you will see tomorrow night. That's quite close to what people saw in 1918, and we'll show that as part of the Red Letter Day. So be alert, be aware. I mean, the program will start at 5, but we're going to do the towards the end of it. We'll show Shoulder Arms, which will also be available separately. And that's 40 minutes long, so that program's going to run a while. It'll be close to a 3-hour program, 2.5 hours. So those of you who are already familiar with Shoulder Arms or watched the same print earlier in the day or today, you will be able to take a dinner break, unlike me. Any other questions?
Yeah, we got Mike here with his hand up. So Mike, you have the floor. Mike, you have to unmute yourself.
The problem with the unmuting is it's different in different, if you're looking at it on a phone or a Mac, or it's quite complicated. Usually there's on a phone, it's to the lower left, I understand. There'll be a little symbol for it or somewhere.
Mike seems to be having some trouble with the unmute. Let's go. Dominique has another question, so let's pass the mic over to him.
Hi, Dominique.
Hi again. I would like to ask a question to Jason.
Yes.
I know that's a very embarrassing question, because I'm always embarrassed myself when I'm making that question. But anyway, what was your first connection to Chaplin? Sorry for the echo. I suppose you could have any personality, anybody else. Maybe not Schwarzenegger, but why Charlie?
Yeah, very good question. And I do get asked that a lot. Why are you even doing this? Why do you feel a connection? How did it begin? And when did you first, and so on and so forth. My very first memory of Charlie Chaplin for me was, there was a restaurant up here in Canada called Mother's Pizzeria or Spaghetti House or something. Mother's was the name of it. And it had a theme to it. It was sort of an old 20s theme. It was eclectic and weird. And it had big televisions up on near the ceiling, and they weren't flat screens at the time. So I'm dating myself, but we were watching black and white silent films while eating spaghetti all over the restaurant. And you'd have Laurel and Hardy. You'd even have things that weren't silent. You'd have the Three Stooges, that no volume, and this Charlie Chaplin guy, who was the greatest thing. I'd be eating my spaghetti, looking over my mother's head at mother's restaurant, staring at the screen, eating spaghetti and watching this guy. And that etched obviously in my brain. And it would come on TV, you know, as time fillers. It would be sped up so quick. It would be weird 70s music to it, or 80s music that had nothing to do with it. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought it was supposed to look like that. Things like that. Still, I couldn't help but stop and watch the guy. So I learned about him that way, and I still didn't know much about him until I got into acting and realized that my body was starting to be very similar in size. I've always been a small framed guy. You know, I kind of fit the bill. And I thought that's the pioneering of acting somewhat. So when you're starting out in acting and learning drama in high school, and as I said, Stephen Bainborough, my drama teacher here, is online, I actually tapped into things that I knew and things that I related to. And I related to Charlie Chaplin and the way he moved. I think I felt I was the only guy that did that on the planet. Meanwhile, now I'm realizing I wasn't alone. Just like I used to think I was the only guy that loved Star Wars. I think I'm not alone there either. But I took it and Chaplin to heart. So I used him in everything I could, and I did it without noticing it until I needed to notice it. When I was asked, you know, I was doing professional theater here up in Barrie, north of Toronto. What kind of role would you like to do, Jason, on stage? What would you like? And that was Talk is Free Theater here in Barrie. Arkady Spivak said that to me. I said, well, you know, I'd love to do Charlie Chaplin. If there was ever a Charlie Chaplin show, I would love to do that. And he said, well, why don't you write one? I said, well, I laughed, and I'm not a writer. I don't write. But I went home and I wrote a one-man, one-act, 1 hour play, stage play, and performed it to an audience after some development, and then it got picked up and I remounted and so on. So that's where I really actually started. A little bit of a long-winded answer, I know, and why Chaplin? Because my body feels like what I see on screen. I feel like I can do that, and I fit myself into it. And I wanted to take that role on as an actor, as a major challenge. I thought, if I can only do that, then I know that I've achieved something great. And I'm still that student. And I've been doing it for 15 years now.
Thank you. Thank you. If I had your talent, I would have done the same. But I don't have your talent.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Because
a great collection of books.
I felt the same when it was 4, 5, 6 years ago, and was impersonating the tram tragedy in my grandfather's home, but just that was only impersonating for a child. That's all.
Well, you see, that brings up a very good point. What you just said there is you feel maybe you don't look like Chaplin now enough to impersonate him, and that I do more so. I used to think that if I could just look like Chaplin and be the spitting image and do that, I will just excel at it more than anybody else in the world. And that was a goal of mine at one point, until I met people that love Chaplin deeply on a spiritual level and will portray him with all that they've got. And they don't actually resemble him in any way. And we've got females that do it, that actually look just like him, you know, wasn't what I thought wasn't my idea of it. I thought you had to be as much like him as possible. So my concept of portraying Chaplin has completely changed. Yes, my body still similarly, I still have the similar abilities and so on. I am getting older, so things are changing on me. But watching other people do it and enjoying it means an awful lot to me. I've been around the world to do this, and we have online right now, we have some friends from India who we have Ashok Aswani online, very famous for portraying Chaplin. He doesn't look exactly like Chaplin either, and but the spirit that comes out of him is enormous. and it's gone around the globe a couple times and is still going. And his grandson Talon, who's also online, and who we were supposed to be with right now in California. They were going to join us all the way from India physically, but Mother Nature had a different idea. My point is that a whole town, Adipur, India, dresses up like Charlie Chaplin and parades around like Charlie Chaplin, and the spirit that emanates from that, from Adipur on Chaplin's birthday is you can't get that anywhere. And it's I've been there. I've had the great honor and pleasure to be there during those celebrations. And then in Niles, I'm fortunate enough to also be part of the lookalike contest there to help judge those. And the passion that comes out of everybody, we got young children dressing up as a full-grown tramp. We have ladies dressing as female characters or as Tramp himself, and so on and so forth. As you'll see when you tune in tomorrow, with the whiz bang and all, it's, well, anyway, it gets me very excited. I used to be all about being an actor, but I'm completely opposite of that. I'm all about everybody. I think everybody should dress like Chaplin. I mean, why not?
Did you dress like that if your resemblance with Chaplin was not the same, were not the same? Your tall was higher, and your hair was different?
Yeah, well, my immediate answer is, of course. But in reality, that's what's led me to my thoughts right now, is the fact that I did emulate him the best I could as an actor. And through that, I discovered actually other people in the way that it can be more spiritual, so to speak, for lack of better words. But that I would probably tend to feel that that's the way I would be now. But here I am still, that actor that's created it with my body and so on. It's hard to answer that one, yeah.
Yeah. I'm agree that the spiritual thing is one point, and perpetuating Chaplin's image and Chaplin's popularity everywhere in the world is the main point. So if you're right, if you don't resemble Chaplin, that doesn't prevent you from imitating Chaplin. The main point is the spirit. I agree with you with that.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely my point. The spirit, the knowledge of the spirit came after for me, and I wish it had come first. It's the most beautiful thing.
If I could shake your hand, I would shake your hand, but we can't.
Thank you very much. Great question.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
William wants to know, have you approached the Chaplin family regarding this project? And are there any clearances that you would have to get for the use of the image? And is there any possibility of using any of Chaplin's music for the series? That goes to you, Dan.
Yes, I'm fortunate that I know the woman who is the head of the Chaplin estate, who represents, who's the sort of front person, has been for some years, a lovely woman, Kate Guyan-Bar. And she knows about the project. And, you know, that's an open question right now because, of course, you know, one doesn't need permission from the Chaplin estate to do a sort of biography, but they do control certain aspects of his images, and certainly the films, some of the films that are still on copyright. But this is not going to be a documentary, as we've mentioned. It's going to be a dramatized thing. So I'm, you know, and I would never do anything, you know, behind their back, as it were, or violate any of their rights, because you know, these folks have become friends, and it would be like, you know, like stealing from my own family at this point. So whatever is necessary, but a lot of things will boil down to money and so on, because of course that is the he's still making lots of money for his heirs, and deservedly so.
Okay, Mike has his hands up again. Let's see if we can bring him in. Mike, you're on.
Unmute yourself, Mike.
No, he's done.
Hello? Can you hear me?
There he is. There he is.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Hey, Dan, I appreciate the invite. I'm your buddy from Central Texas. We've been exchanging emails for about 5 years now.
I know that it's been a chore. It's been a horrible humiliating experience for me, and I hope so for you too.
Yeah, it's a.
You are after all a lunatic.
I'm sorry, say it again.
You are after all a lunatic.
Yeah, lunatic. Hey, I haven't heard that one before, right?
No, I
Well, I was in a grade school, in a parochial school in Laredo, Texas, when the first lunar landings. So you can imagine how often I heard lunatic, lunar landing, lunar module. So it goes on and on. But anyway, I've really enjoyed your conversation. You know that the service here is breaking in and out. So I don't know if someone else has asked if you all have spoken with the Chaplin family in Switzerland, and I know they've spread out to France and Italy. I'm on a newsletter that I get from the museum from Switzerland, and they had an article about one of Charlie Chaplin's grandsons who looks just like him. Have you all been in contact or any interest shown by the family?
Well, not so much about this project, other than to explore, in a very preliminary way. But of course, we're at a very preliminary stage here. We've been doing development work, but the next step would be to really find people within the, if there is a within. I mean, because the movie industry is also, especially now with the advent of streaming TV and the entry into the game by Amazon and everybody is it seems is pouring money into content more so than ever now during the lockdown. Of course, everybody's exploded, as is the Zoom app, and so they're well aware of this. And I've had the good luck to have gotten to meet a number of the members of the family and become friends with some of them, as has Human, who is our technical guy today. So I would hope they would be very pleased with whatever we would do.
Right. It just in the newsletters, it seems like they're trying to promote the museum, or had been up until 4 or 5 months ago.
It's an unlikely success story. I thought a museum in the middle of Switzerland devoted to Charlie Chaplin, and yet it's been a phenomenal success until, of course, every museum in the world closed down with the COVID. But they will survive, and people seem to love it. I have not been there yet. I'm looking forward to that experience, but they have forbidden me from darkening their doorstep.
Yeah, I wonder if they'd be interested in backing some more exposure in the States. I don't know, but anyway, Dan, it's really nice talking to you, and I'll try to listen on as much as I can. This reception here is in and out.
Yeah, that'll be varying from person to person. Thanks for coming by, Mike. It's nice to hear your voice after becoming your pen pal for these few years.
I know. I was just thinking that a little while ago. Anyway, nice talking to you, Dan. You too. Take care. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a written question from Karen, who says that the Young Charlie Chaplin series was there was a weakness in that only one young man was playing him for the whole series. Would you have different actors playing him as a child and a teen?
Come on, Mama. Let's go to the mailbox.
I'm sorry, who you had completed that question?
That's I hadn't muted Mike, so we got a little bit of feedback there. So would you have different actors playing Chaplin as a child and as a teen?
No, we're going to have Jason playing him from early infancy to.
No, that wasn't the agreement. Dan's playing all the young Chaplin.
It's a whole new concept, and you're
Yeah,
going to have to diet so that you can get small enough. First of all,
it's really just to showcase Dan and I and our acting abilities. We're actually both playing just the very young Chaplin, and some schmuck can play the rest of them. I don't know.
You know, it's a great question, and I've thought of this a little bit. And you know, really, it's going to depend on the nature of the actors. I think I was involved with the Chaplin musical on Broadway. The guy, at first, there were more actors playing Chaplin than it ended up being. It ended up really being just one child and one adult playing Chaplin. With a thing of this scope, obviously, there's going to be more actors involved. And so we might have one of the actors who played Charlie in the stage play. There were a series that came through who were part of the Billy Elliot. They were trained for Billy Elliot, and people would go to a Billy camp and learn the tap dancing and dance skills to play Billy Elliot in that smash musical. And one of them had been through that, and he could do anything. He was a great. I was teaching him like mime routines that we were using in the Chaplin musical. And so maybe we'll have a Charlie camp. There will be a Charlie camp for not just Charlie, but other actors who are playing silent film actors, and even not silent film. Chaplin had a particular way of working with actors. You know, in the same way he had a way of working with people who are musically literate, because he was musically illiterate, as you all probably know. He would hum things. He couldn't read music. So, and yet every different composer or arranger, he would call them arrangers usually, that he worked with, it still sounds like Charlie Chaplin's music, no matter who he was working with. He just had a great melodic and gift and a great taste for how to marry music to action, which of course was partly picked up in his childhood growing up literally on the music hall stage, where it was all action set to music or singing acts and so on, pantomimes in the British sense of a fairy tale musical. And so those are intriguing questions, and you know, will be answered as things. You know, it would be foolish for us to try to make decisions about that before more of the pieces are in you know, you know, we're set to go into production tomorrow. If we had somebody working the same 3 years that we've been working on such questions and on set issues and money issues about which country you're filming in and which star power. Robert Downey got the job partially because there were a lot of unknown people who auditioned for the movie Chaplin, and a lot of famous people like Billy Crystal and Michael Jackson wanted to play the role. But they knew they needed somebody who not only had a name recognition, they knew they needed somebody who had name recognition to sell a major motion picture. I don't think that's going to be quite the same issue here, because there are going to be a number of Charlies and so on. But it'll be intriguing. It's a question I really hope I have to find the answer to. I think you feel the same way, Jason.
Yeah, it's certainly a problem I'd like to have, trying to figure out how many Chaplins we need for our series. Darn, now we got to cast this thing. Damn, I never thought it would come to this point.
Maybe a different Charlie for literally every scene, because we could just draw on all the years of the SNA, you know, museum Chaplin contest. And a lot of those people, we have all ages. When you see all those pictures of the Chaplin imitators in front of the theaters in 1920 and 1915, you see people, as you were talking about, Jason, they're all shapes and sizes and ages. And, you know, they're all endearing. I judged one that had about 200 people in Waterville, Ireland once. And it was, I got pictures of the people sitting in this, it was in a circus tent, actually, the grandstand of a circus. And it was just fascinating because everybody was, it's like the biographies, like I was saying to David Robinson in our interview today, in our, with him, you know, there's nobody who's bad. And everybody, at worst, they're endearing. Yep. at times a little annoying, but mostly endearing. And because, you know, everybody is there because they have been touched by something of this spirit of Chaplin that is so compelling and so apparently timeless. I remember answering an earlier question. Well, actually, it was a question to you. How did you first get involved? I got involved in college. I'd never seen a Charlie Chaplin movie, and they showed The Gold Rush. And I walked out of that film into a different life. Yeah. When I went home the next time for on a break, I remember it's ringing in my ear still. My stepdad, who grew up in the 40s and 50s, said, well, he's a fine hero for you to have, because of course to him, Charlie Chaplin was a commie, politically suspect, lecherous old man. And that was his rep. And as David was saying today earlier, David Robinson, a lot of that was stage managed. You know, the paternity suit was not the government's fault. The government stage managed the suit, but he did have a relationship with that woman. He just was very certain that it wasn't his baby, because their relationship stopped about a year before she got pregnant. And so, or at least a few months before she got pregnant. And so Chaplin was dead certain that he insisted on exoneration, which was a mistake. If he had just paid off, he would have saved himself about $1 billion worth of bad publicity. But he was honorable when he, you know, in previous issues where somebody got pregnant, he got married. He married them and entered into his disastrous marital career. But anyway, all these things will be dealt with in one way or another in our mini-series, won't they, Jason?
Oh yeah. You've covered a lot of bases. I'm, like I said, I get a phone call at a random time of day, and Dan's answered and fixed a problem I didn't even know we had, and he put it into writing, and he even put it into dialogue. When I say we, I mean I printed out copies of his writing. So that's when I say we have some script, actual episodes written, and much to my delight, it's a real treat to sit there and read through something that was just a conversation at a breakfast table on Niles Boulevard, in Niles Boulevard one morning. And here it is, Dan Kamin sends me a script. Seeing it happen is amazing.
Well, don't sell yourself short, because you've been a creative goad, and the reality is, you know, nobody's going to rewrite Shakespeare as well as Shakespeare. Nobody's going to do Chaplin as well as Chaplin. You know, as he said, if you want to know about my life, watch my movies. If you want to, you know, why, you know, the challenge of doing a biography film that Richard Attenborough faced and Robert Downey faced was the same challenge that you would face if you were a musician and somebody said, would you do me I've got a lot of money for you. I want you to write me a symphony about Beethoven. Yeah. Well, what's the point? The point is there's still a story to tell. And, you know, when we get there, when we're in the park trying to figure out something to do, and we know it's got to be funny, it's going to be a team effort. I've been relying on you these past 3 years to channel, you know, just as Charlie channeled the work of the better trained musicians, you know, to filter these ideas and bounce them back and forth, as Charlie did. That was his working method as well. And it may not be just you and I. It's got to be funny. You can't have a series called Funnyman if it's not funny, and it's going to be a team effort. And we're going to get whoever we need to make it funny. If it's not funny enough, we have to do it again until it is. Otherwise, we have no show. There is no Robin Williams bio without him being really funny. And there is no Funnyman without somebody at the heart who looks like they can turn life experience on a dime into the kind of crazy, manic, hilarious, funny stuff that we saw Robin Williams doing. You know, his talent was never captured in a movie, in my opinion, because they were canned, and you couldn't capture the essential element of it, which was his astonishing gift at improvisation and speaking off the cuff and jumping on that train of his mind that seems to be going 90 miles a minute. But every time you saw him, you realized, oh, this guy, it was almost scary to watch him. I don't know about you, I would get nervous watching him perform as I was screaming with laughter, because it just was dangerous, like watching a tightrope walk. Yeah. And by all accounts, Chaplin had that quality, and it's because you and I understand that we know that's the core that we have. Because who cares? He had a sad life. So who didn't? Yeah. It's because of him. It's why he got forgiven for his his misdeeds by a public that knew them all too well at a time when a divorce, let alone mental cruelty or marrying somebody who was in a different power situation of you, was a terrific scandal. You know, you didn't get to be president until Ronald Reagan, and if you were divorced, that disqualified you.
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah, well,
we address that.
and that's true. I mean, with Robin Williams, you know there's this magic about what that person does that only that person can do, and you just can't put your finger on exactly what it is, and you cannot put it in a bottle, you can't repackage it, you can't make somebody else do it, you can't make a reasonable enough facsimile for it. And Chaplin has that same thing. We can talk all about that thing we can't put our finger on, and we'll never get our finger on it. The only way to do it is to just stop talking and go look at a movie. So I think the trick by trying to make a television series that gives out or portrays that same quality is that we have to have a checklist of exactly what we want as show creators. Dan had a list of things that he wanted, and I had a list of things that I wanted. Dan kept driving. It has to be funny. If it's not funny, what are we doing? We got to, what's the point of it? It can't be drama all day long. It's called Funnyman. The title of the project is called Funnyman because Dan came up with that title, and it fits perfectly. Rather than being called Chaplin, Funnyman, it says more in this case. And his point was to make it funny. We needed to address people's sensitivities in this era. That's our audience right now. And we also need to show the genius. And the genius comes out in a lot of the writing in a very early form. Before Dan even knew that a series was an idea, he was writing it in his little novel that he created that I eventually read. The brilliance is something that was one of my check marks. And we have to see the genius of Chaplin come through, and it has to be illustrated. Just because we cannot put that lightning in a bottle. There's no way to do that. You can't do it with Robin Williams. You can't do it with, you can't even do it with Jim Carrey. You can't do it with anybody who has this unique ability. But what you can do is use special effects. You can go into the brain of that person, something that the audience sitting on the couch wants. They want to actually feel, why the heck does that Chaplin guy have a genius of any kind? Oh, and what is it? I want to see it. I need it illustrated. Oh, and you've only got an hour to show me a little bit of brilliance. I might tune in for another hour of it later, and so on and so on. So it has to come out in the writing, and Dan hit it right on the head. I don't know, Dan, if you want to mention some of the early, so maybe the opening episode. I don't know if anybody's interested in actually hearing a bit of a walkthrough of it. Those are the things that really excite me. I thought maybe some of the people would like to hear it.
You know, when I began writing a book, a novel about the life of Charlie, I realized a novel is a different thing. Even if you write a novel, a historical novel like Ragtime that uses real characters, you make up stuff in a novel. You make up stuff in any movie. I've written an article recently about a movie that haunted me as a child and still does, the movie Houdini with Tony Curtis. Because of that, I became a boy magician, and I still do magic. I still enjoy doing magic for people, working into shows. There's no, although like everybody else, I was imitating Charlie Chaplin when I saw that first film. I wanted to feel in my body the way it felt to be that person who had so galvanized me and commanded my attention and shook me with laughter. And it was the best film I'd ever seen. And I was studying industrial design in college, and I walked into a different life, as I said. But very quickly I realized that I didn't want to be Charlie Chaplin. His work affected me so powerfully that I realized if I was ever going to perform, and I hadn't really ever performed except as a magician up to that time, that I had to invent my own characters, because I had a dream very early where Charlie Chaplin was just sitting there looking at me with his hands on his knees, and he wasn't being funny. What are you doing? What's your comedy? who's your inner idiot? Who's, you know, and because of course it was very serious to me about the power of this art. And so I became first a mime, where I was doing kind of many characters and different characters for every sketch, dreading somebody coming back to my dressing room at the end of the show saying, I know where you got, you're just a second-rate Charlie Chaplin. And it took me several years to realize I'm 6'3", and I don't, even Chaplin buffs, you know, there are a few references, you know, moments that are, you know, momentary little things. But basically, I did take that injunction seriously. When I started writing the book about Chaplin, for that matter, when I started working on the movie with Downey, with Robert Downey, the various drafts, they were written by famous people. Tom Stoppard did one of the drafts of the Chaplin movie, but they faltered. The drafts all faltered when they actually had to show him doing comedy, because for fictional purposes, they wanted to not do what Charlie did. They wanted to invent their own thing. And I was immersed enough in it by the time I got involved with that movie, because I'd been performing mime on stages for people by that time, I'd been performing since I was 12, but I'd been performing mime for 10 or 15 years. So I knew in my body what it felt like to do physical comedy. And I could tell the script was not going to work. And so I ended up getting assigned the unenviable task of rewriting Shakespeare, as it were, and coming up with some of the physical comedy sequences that were in that movie. When I started writing the novel, but you're still working with flesh. You're still out in the park, just with, you're sweaty, and how do you make it, you know, when I started writing the novel, I realized the same opportunity was there. Charlie tells us, for example, that he got mocked in school because he was wearing his mother's hand-me-downs. His mother cut down her theater red tights for him, and he got mocked in school, and everybody is calling him Sir Francis Drake, which we Americans don't know as well, but every British schoolboy in 1894, when this was happening, or 95, would have known that Sir Francis Drake was a famous explorer. If Francis Drake's statue was in America, maybe even in England now, it would be being toppled right now, because he was one of the conquering colonials. But every British schoolboy knew Sir Francis Drake. And that's all Charlie tells us, is that the kids are mocking him on the playground, just like Mike Luna was talking about kids mocking his name. It occurred to me to make Charlie vivid, to show who he was as a character. I would give him a kind of a superpower. I'd let him be precocious, as he was precocious the same period of time, because it's the same period in which he replaces his mother on stage when her voice fails, that he tells us about. Our only source of that is him. And if it didn't happen, it should have happened. But he gives us detail about how he replaced her and what he did that got the audience. I did that with the scene in the playground. And I called my first chapter of my book, my novel on Charlie Chaplin, Sir Francis Drake. Because what Charlie Chaplin does, as these older kids start to gang up on him and are mocking him because he's wearing ridiculous red tights, is he does something with his posture. He's a little shrimpy kid, and he moves up to his full height. Instead of crying or running away or fighting them, he moves up to his full height and says, I am Sir Francis Drake. And he makes it so real, and he starts striding the deck. And he makes it so real that the boys look on as he says, and I'm looking for people for my next voyage. How about you? Get over that. And he makes, you know, take this mop, start mopping. And the boys start, and he creates a scene and draws everybody into the scene. And that's going to be our first episode as well, part of our first episode. And it will be called Sir Francis Drake. So that's the kind of thinking that Jason and I have been doing. And I'm really glad we've had this, that this has turned into, we're trying your patience, because we've gone on for a long time, but you're all still here, which I'm glad to see, because this is exactly the way Jason and I have been having the time of our lives, you know, because as Woody Allen said, poor Woody Allen, who's getting revised now because of perceived sexual issues, but his films are still wonderful. Midnight in Paris was his best film, maybe, and I'm not ready to dispose of him yet. He always said writing the film is the best part of his life, because other than that, he's dealing with crews and people and rain and bugs. And, you know, here, our canvas is as wide as we want it to be. And Jason, I shouldn't speak for you, but I've been having a great time working with you on this and developing it. And if it never goes anywhere, it's helped me understand Charlie better. And every time I've done something in relation to Charlie, I seem to understand my own craft better, and because I'm still out there performing for a living, or at least I will when there is a there. Now I'm doing it online. I'm doing sleight of hand magic online for respite care for people, because I realized this is a good medium for showing people things like this. I'll be doing a respite magic trick for people tomorrow at the 1 o'clock, excuse me, at the 1 o'clock chaplain, what is it called? It has a great name, Rena. What's it called? It's called the look-alike, whiz-bang look-alike, this and that. And with this great 20-minute montage of people doing chaplain things from all over the world, as we mentioned. I think it's time for us to wrap it up. And having let you eavesdrop on what our lives have been for the past 3 years. And, you know, if for no other reason, then it's been such a pleasure to be having this conversation with you for 3 years. I want this, I'm going to do everything possible, as I know you will, to make this a reality. And anybody who has ideas for us, please shoot them to us. Whiz Bang Talent Show, Trivia Quiz, which Jason will be hosting, and Look-alike Contest. Nigel Driner will also be online with some of his antics. And so see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and then at 5 o'clock, I'll be doing the Red Letter Days program about Charlie and World War I. So I would like to say my thank you again to the Niles S&A Silent Film Museum for making sure that every summer has its chaplain days. And, you know, one last thing I have to say, Jason, before I turn it to you to finish this off. Nobody's making art for the future. Charlie Chaplin in the park in 1914 was making a living, and quite literally, and didn't think this stuff had staying power. He could have bought the rights to those films when he within a year or so he could have got, you know, he didn't. He thought it was disposable like any other actor. It's for today. Somehow, by some miracle, we don't dispose of some disposable art. You haven't disposed of Shakespeare yet, or Beethoven, or George Gershwin, and we haven't disposed of Charlie. And it's just so fantastic that it keeps on happening, and that we've been so privileged in our lives to be partaking of that pleasure of imbibing his art, enjoying his art as spectators, and somehow being part of that world. That's what I walk into when I walked out of that first showing of The Gold Rush, is a different world that included Charlie Chaplin, a better world to be in. And we certainly are all waiting for a better world. And that's my last word today.
Well, thanks, Dan. Yeah.
Stop that, my friend.
Wow. Okay. It's always hard going after Dan. Oh, damn. I hate that. Even on the phone, I have to say goodbye last, and his is always funnier. Sucks. So, yeah, quite the contrary. That yeah, he's not disposable whatsoever. And I'm not talking about Dan. He's not disposable at all. As a matter of fact, I think there's quite a renaissance. As a matter of fact, it feels that way to me. There's a lot of Chaplin. Maybe it's just the circles I hang out with. I don't know, or the panels I hang out in. But seriously, I think it's time for a little more education on Charlie Chaplin. There's a wealth of good feeling there that's still wrapping the planet. And I think it needs to go on the medium of Netflix. And I keep saying Netflix. And for those of you who are wondering, we don't have an in with Netflix. I just use it as a sample idea. Anybody who has a streaming service, call me. That's the medium it should be on. Because my mandate in my mind is that I need everybody to understand Charlie Chaplin just a little bit more, because there's a wealth of art there. We see it in Switzerland. I know it's way over there to us North Americans, but if you go to Vevey, go check it out. It's a fantastic museum. The way they've set that up, it's way better than I expected it to be. I'll tell you, it's breathtaking to be there. And like I said, I think there's a little bit of a renaissance happening if I have anything to do with it, I hope. So yes, talking with Dan on the phone, we have been living in our own little Jello bowl with only 2 ingredients, he and I, and it's been bliss. This, I don't know if anybody on the panel or anybody listening right now has ever sat and developed a television series concept that's ready for pitching before, but I'll tell you, we live in greatness right now. This is a perfect episode. We see it in our minds. It's beautiful in every way. We haven't encountered one issue yet, really, but nobody's bought it yet. There aren't a dozen more cooks in the kitchen yet. And there aren't people that are pulling the proper wires and strings and so on and have all the right say and all the right pockets. So we are living in bliss right now. It's probably from this point forward that it's no longer going to be bliss, as pleasurable as it will be, I hope. But thank you all for, hanging out with us, hearing our crazy ideas. I wish I had recorded every one of our phone calls. That would be a long video to watch or listen to anyway, a podcast. But I would like to do more of this as we develop. I want to bring better news to you. I want to say that we met with the executives at blah, 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 and they love it. And they were actually on the panel today, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, but thank you very much. And thank you very, very, very much, Rena, at Niles SNA Silent Film Museum in Niles, California. Charlie Chaplin Days has really, really changed my life. It allowed me to connect with experts in the field and Dan Kamin, and above all others for this project, especially. But thank you very much. And I should just shut up now. You see why I do a silent film star often?
If you do it, I'll do it.
I doubt it. I doubt you do that. Be silent.
Good talking to you, my friend. Good talking to all of you out there. Look forward to seeing you in real life, in real time. Stay safe, and we'll see you when the plague is over or before online.